My name is Eric Shu. I'm a investor here at Access Venture Partners based in Denver, Colorado. We're a early stage seed Series A VC firm. Uh, Super excited here to have this wonderful group here to chat with us about national security and cybersecurity. Everybody here has actually flown in from not Denver, so really delighted to have them here with us today. No, we got an hour, so we'll do intros first. We've got some questions that we've kind of talked about, and then we'd love to open it up to folks in attendance today to ask any questions. At the end, we're actually hosting a happy hour as well, starting at 5:45 over at the View House ballpark location. So if folks want to join and chat some more, feel free to join us there. So yeah, with that, we'll just kind of go down the line here. Tell us a little bit about your firm, your background, and your investment thesis.
Great. No? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay, great. Hello, everyone. I'm Gabby. I'm an investor at First In. We're an early stage VC firm that empowers entrepreneurs who secure our freedom. So our investment thesis is focused on security technology at the seed stage, primarily looking at cybersecurity, dual use and defense technologies, and data intelligence. We're currently investing out of our fund 2 with $1 to $2 million checks, and we both lead and follow. Just quickly on my background before joining the VC industry and First In, I was active duty in the Navy, first driving ships in the Pacific, and then as an intelligence officer.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Alex with Lavrock Ventures. We're an early stage venture capital firm based in the Washington, D.C. area. We do seed and Series A investments into enterprise software, data, cybersecurity, deep tech, and national security. I'd say a typical check size for us is kind of a $3 million check, and we prefer to be the lead investor if possible. Background before I got involved in Lavrock, I was a former consultant, so kind of business strategy operations background by trade. But my partners all have kind of variety of experience from private equity to the intelligence community.
Hi, everyone. My name is Keely. I am with a firm called Decisive Point. We invest in early stage deep technologies for defense, security, and critical infrastructure, also primarily at the seed and Series A stage. Also currently investing out of our second fund with checks ranging from about $500K to $2.5 million. We're based in Boston, New York City, and DC. My personal background is corporate finance. Many of our team members are former operators. I am not one of them. But yeah, support a lot of our due diligence and a couple of our other lines of business.
Awesome. You're doing a great job bringing the network together to support Denver.
How to do that.
All that out. So my name's Dan Mann. I'm from Squadron Ventures. We're a VC firm focused on early stage national security and cybersecurity startups. Just raised our second fund, writing $1 to $4 million checks. That's where lead impact supporting. My own background, I served in the Marines, worked on the Hill, spent several years at the Rand Corporation.
Can't hear you.
Test?
A little closer, yes.
Closer.
All right, that was nice. Are we actually recording this?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll use the mic.
All right. So anyway, served in the Marines, worked on the Hill, spent several years at the Rand Corporation doing modernization studies for the Department of Defense, helping them figure out what they need next. Then went and spent some time in the Office of Secretary of Defense, moved up to New York to serve kind of as a tech scout and community builder for the Department of Defense, and then joined Squadron Ventures.
Rob Ackerman, I'm Managing Director at Data Tribe. We're based in DC. We do seed through Series B, deep tech, cybersecurity, data science primarily. We're investing out of our third and our fourth funds. We typically lead when you're talking about seed and Series A. As far as my background, Naval Academy grad, Naval Intelligence, ONI, DIA, got out, started on later stage cybersecurity, and then slowly worked my way down to where we are today, where I sort of lead the Series A and the Series B practice.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. And quick poll for the audience, just to see so we know kind of who is all here. If you're working at a startup or a founder, can you just raise your hand? Sweet. Okay, awesome. Any investors out here? Sweet. All right, cool. Any other groups out here? Operators, engineers? Cybersecurity, okay, cool. Awesome. Okay, great. Thanks all for joining us. So to kick things off, over the last year, we've seen a lot of activity in VC funding going into companies that are building solutions that solve both private sector and public sector problems. What do you think is the driving force behind this activity, and do you think it's sustainable?
I'll jump on that grenade. So there's a few different trends that I think are driving interest. At the really obvious headline level, Russia invaded Ukraine, right? So, both at a cultural level and at a market level, some important things change, right? All of a sudden, I think that both European ministries of defense and the U.S. Department of Defense got more interested in refreshing technology and began to get feedback from the battlefield that was telling them maybe our current portfolio of capabilities weren't going to be what we needed for the future. And that meant there were going to be some really meaningful opportunities. A little bit deeper than that, the U.S. competition with China is a massive change from the kinds of conflicts that the United States and its allies have been focused on over the preceding decades. Right? Previously, we were intensely focused on counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, the kinds of capabilities that you need to deter China from engaging in a war of aggression against Taiwan that looks something like what we're seeing in Europe right now, are fundamentally different from what the department's largely been focused on over the preceding decades. Another layer deep, the level of technology trends and sort of underlying market trends. The kinds so for decades, actually even going back to the 70s, the balance of sort of power in research and development has been shifting from the public sector to the private sector. The private sector has actually been outweighing the Department of Defense and the U.S. federal government in R&D expenditures for a long time, for decades. But I think what happened around the time that everyone started getting excited about machine learning and AI, the lines start to cross to that. A lot of the technologies that the private sector was really advancing the fastest, what was driving commercial returns, also became super relevant for military applications. Same thing goes with space, right? And so at that point, the Department of Defense became decided at a policy level, they wanted to become much better customers for startups and for non-traditional defense industry providers that historically, they weren't necessarily great customers.
And I can add on top of that as well. I think Dan spoke to a lot of kind of the driving forces behind how the market has expanded on that side of things. But on the flip side, the VC markets have obviously followed, right? Eric talked about additional investment in this area. For the first time in the past couple of years, we're seeing successful venture-backed companies operate in a defense first kind of dual use nature. You get the Anduril, Palantir. These companies are demonstrating that you can innovate in the government and actually kind of make a difference. So we'll see if that's sustainable, but that's kind of another driving trend on the push mechanism.
I mean, they covered most of it. I think a lot of the groundwork has been laid kind of before these past few years. If you look at what DIU is doing and AFWorks, there's a lot more, again, becoming a better customer. There's a lot of better ways to get those early contracts, kind of working around the traditional procurement system. We'll kind of dive into this a little bit about some strategies today for startups. But yeah, the customers have become better. I think the company and the government has also kind of understood a lot of times in the past when they were building things, it was about building for a specific task. And that was really limiting when you were going out to different vendors. And a lot of those products would arrive over budget and dead on arrival and not meeting sort of a multifaceted use set out on the field. What we've seen from the government, what I've seen from the government is now we're seeing much more mission-oriented type of programs. Like, hey, we're not going to tell you exactly the checklist of what we want to do. There's plenty of checklists still. But more about this is the mission we want to accomplish and giving those companies a lot more leeway to build to the mission, not to a specific task. That's opened up sort of the innovative way of thinking of Silicon Valley and the government. So.
And given that there are a number of folks here that are building solutions in this space, maybe we do start with that. What are some ways or maybe best practices that you'd suggest a founder take, right? I think maybe to start, Keely, why don't you walk us through a little bit about what Decisive Point does in-house and how you work with startups and other companies to sell into the government?
Yeah, certainly. So in addition to investing, and when we do invest in a company, we function as a bolt-on government team for them. So we have a few former senior acquisitions officers coming out of DoD that provide deep expertise in forming a realistic federal strategy for these companies. And we try to really take some of the proposal development and contract management workload off of our founders so they can focus on product development and the million other things they have going on. So in addition to that, we do that in an advisory capacity, sort of on an ad hoc basis for companies that are either too big for us to invest in, too early for us to invest in. So we work sort of as consultants in that capacity as well. And then our third line of business that has grown quite a bit over the past couple of years is we run the Department of Defense's largest acceleration program in partnership with the National Security Innovation Network, which is a subordinate office of the Defense Innovation Unit. So we started that off with a mission partner in the Air Force Research Laboratory, their information directorate up in Rome, New York. We've since scaled that and grown that to work with PAC Fleet out in Hawaii. We now work with Special Operations Command. We just kicked off that inaugural program up in Boston. And so we're really seeing a concerted effort from these DoD agencies and offices to adapt and go out and find, the best of what the commercial industry has to offer and how they can sort of work with venture capital investors to go and scout and figure out what's in, the realm of the possible and how that can be adapted to meet different mission requirements. It's called Ensign Propel. Happy to talk more about it.
Yeah, I'll just jump in here. From our perspective, and this is in particular for dual use companies, those who are looking to get their businesses in motion, both commercial and government, right? What we sometimes see with early stage startups is like we will just take any business, so our go-to-market approach is like whoever we can get to first. And that sometimes can make it really difficult for a couple of reasons. One, as I'm sure all of you are aware, the government lead time for getting actual money in your pockets is very, very long. So a government first approach can be the right method, especially if you're going to be more of a defense-focused firm, and it depends on, there's all sorts of caveats here, but we actually love to see, from the dual use perspective, commercial traction first means that you have an ability to extend your runway, have that more easily reachable revenue, and then go bring on some expertise that can help you better understand the government opportunities and really have a little bit more of a focused approach rather than trying to maybe tackle too much at once.
Just going to add to what Gabby said. We're in the same boat. Like, our companies at Data Tribe, we're a little bit different because we have a thesis of we pull a lot of technology and talent out of the NSA. And a lot of those founders that come out of there immediately have FedGov dollars. Those programs just kind of carry over. But I think, I think though that focusing on commercial is really important because I think once you get in the procurement cycle, the government, despite all the positive things that are happening, it still can't take a long time. And you really got to understand the path to recurring revenue with the government is not the commercial cycle. If you're talking about cyber contracts, those are usually non-recurring. Those are usually great for product development, but you're a long way. And so the commercial revenue, one, gives you product market fit, and also hopefully will prevent you from sort of chasing the rabbit too much on the government side, which can happen a ton. The government will string you along and be like, hey, we need to add this, and you can spend a lot of time building a really bespoke product for the government that can actually sometimes preclude you from selling to other government agencies. So the commercial traction, the commercial motion can really kind of help you ride that wave and buy you a little bit more time.
Yeah, lots of great points here. So I don't have like a strong, hard and fast thesis on whether you go defense first or commercial first or dual use, you try to do it together at the same time. We're only making investments in 46 companies. So this is sort of law of small numbers stuff, right? In a certain sense, I don't care what generally works for most people. I really care about understanding like what your strategy is, what your vision is, and how that whether or not we can get conviction around that.
So we can hear you back here.
Sure. Once we invest in you, I'll sit down with you and we'll really go through like a deep strategy session on what makes the most sense in go-to-market, how leveraging the federal market is going to make sense or not for you. We've invested both in defense-first companies and commercial-first and sort of dual-use approaches, and we've seen all of them work. Any of them can work. My background happened to have touched the national security establishment in a lot of different places. So I've worked on the executive side and the legislative. And so we're kind of able to help you understand how to navigate that space.
Awesome. And maybe on the flip side, what are some of the challenges that you've seen a lot of your companies run into? Maybe there's some challenges right now that you're working with or working through your current portfolio.
I can start with that. I think Gabby mentioned at the beginning, timing for the government is probably one of the biggest challenges, especially kind of, at the onset of getting the dollars to start flowing. You could win an opportunity and it could be months before you actually see any revenue from it. So trying to manage that expectation on timing and when, start dates happen, we're about to approach kind of a budget cycle coming up here, potentially, government shutdown that could totally derail a startup, right, if they're not kind of positioned for it. So we deal with that, every year pretty much on timing. So kind of getting ahead of that and understanding that and planning your cash needs around, future dollars from the government is super important. And I would say another thing that kind of, Rob hinted at too is, companies that are chasing SBIR opportunities or government research dollars that, may seem great on the surface, but that money, if it's not going towards a product or a feature that is on your current roadmap or really helping your overall business plan, then that can be distracting and it kind of takes resources away from the kind of larger goal. So kind of don't chase the short-term, money for the long-term, sacrifice.
Related to that, a lot of startups will pitch investors and mention, hey, we have X number of SIVers, we have government dollars coming in, we have these contracts that are going to happen. How do you all think about that as part of the traction when you're evaluating companies? And maybe this is more of a due diligence question.
Yeah, I think our team spends quite a bit of time unpacking both existing traction and potential to scale in the federal market before we make an investment decision one way or another. I think my biggest piece of advice would be honest and transparent about where you are in your journey with the federal market. Sometimes we will see pitch decks that have 50 DoD logos splattered all over, and founders can't speak to anything tangible or any tangible engagements. And if you don't have any engagement to date, that's okay. I would just say come with a reasonable and clear strategy and concrete steps you plan to take, and be honest about where you would need help from a strategic investor in executing that.
Yeah, kind of to add on to both of those points, when we sit down with the founders for the first time, and usually at the C stage, and this doesn't have to be hard and fast, but try to know who you are. Try to understand what you're building for, who you're building for. Don't say you're going to go capture the entire market. Try to be a little bit more focused. When you're talking about, those initial contracts, when I look at it from a diligence perspective, it's like, what are you trying to accomplish with that? Dollars just for dollars' sake isn't like, where does that fit on your roadmap? What are you trying to accomplish? What's the end state? How do these things help you accomplish that? Because if you do, you can spend, and we've seen it recently, a lot of time, focusing on one government agency. You'll spend years and years chasing those dollars, and you'll end up with one product, and then you can't sell that product because it only fits the use cases of one specific department or one specific program. That's very, very limiting. And you can build really, really great businesses that way. Those just typically don't tend to be venture scale businesses where we want to apply our dollars.
And just building on that, the value of a dollar isn't a dollar. It's the value of a dollar is what it tells us about the future. And so if you're getting research and development dollars from the Department of Defense, like the research and development establishment within the Department of Defense ends up much of the time actually having very weak relationships with the acquisition community, ironically. Much less forget about the actual operators who are going downrange into harm's way. So yeah, like actually doing the hard work, like plotting out, is my product roadmap, what's the value of what I'm trying to do with my product roadmap of these different sort of branches and sequels I could go down.
Yeah, sorry, just quickly, I think Dan pointed out something really important here, which is that investors who are in this space know these things, right? Dan knows this because he's a Marine Corps veteran, because he spent time on the Hill, because he's been at the Office of the Secretary of Defense. These things are really great from your perspective, can be, I think, as a founder, when you're looking for strategic investment partners, if you're going to be a dual use or defense focused company, because that insider knowledge, if you don't have it requisite already, is really, really hard to get and not at all intuitive. So just something to consider. There's a lot of generalists who've entered the space, which there are lots of pros and cons to that. But being able to have this level of knowledge about how to successfully go after the government market is really important.
Awesome. I'm going to pivot a little bit here and talk maybe broadly about AI. Right, we have a lot of these models pop up on the scene. A lot of AI getting integrated or built into platforms that you're seeing today. Can you kind of just speak to how your understanding or thinking about the use of artificial intelligence, whether it's within your companies or at the companies that you're evaluating?
It's AI, finally. Look, I mean, from a cybersecurity perspective, my thesis, I think our thesis internally to Data Tribe is we're very much heading to a spy versus spy, AI versus AI world. AI is a great tool that lets people iterate very, very quickly, which means that the attack surface, again, is sort of exponential, and the only way to counteract that is with AI. And so when you look at these large companies, I think of AI as a tool, not to replace humans, but just to help them work quicker and things like that. That's in general. When you get into things like large language models, I think it's really interesting. Things about those data sets and poisoning data sets, and I still think it's really, like, I'll be really honest, it's still really early to know where it's all going. It's happening really fast. It's going to happen. But from a cybersecurity perspective, the genie's out of the bottle. It's going to be an AI versus AI world, but it's going to be mostly not replacing people, but augmenting people just to make them more efficient.
I guess I'll try and focus in a little bit more on our, like, sort of the defense space. Well, one broad comment, right? Like, fundamentally, like, I'm not sure when you think about investing or building in AI, it's not necessarily super fundamentally different from a challenge that you end up running into with a lot of deep tech, which is sometimes it's actually easier to come up with an extraordinary technology which is going to have a real impact on human beings. But having achieved that doesn't necessarily mean that you've discovered a business model that's going to be viable and scalable to venture levels. So that's one thing. And then more specific to the defense and national security domain, you end up layering in, and this is sort of true of a lot of like heavily regulated industries like finance. But in the national security layer, for things when you start thinking about autonomous applications for unmanned systems, you end up with a whole nother sort of set of policy, ethical issues that could actually end up slowing down the rate of deployment. Is the challenge of, and actually you even see this like with Tesla and the pursuit of full autonomy in our commercial lives, right? In our everyday lives. The edge cases will kill you, almost literally, right? Trying to solve for the edge cases can be extraordinarily difficult. And when you add the complexity of the unstructured environments, which are typical of the national security space, it's just definitely non-trivial.
So beyond just AI, what are some of the other areas that you all have been digging into, right? Broadly, you say cybersecurity, or broadly, you say national security, but within those spaces, are there certain technologies or kind of problem sets that you're looking at to solve for, that you want to spend time in?
I'll start. Yeah, so this the DoD makes it easy. They have a critical technologies list, which is informative, at least, in thinking about what matters most to the DoD. And a couple of those things on the list in particular have been interesting us of late. And they kind of center around bending the cost curve of weapon systems for defense, right? So there was a really great piece in Foreign Affairs recently about how technology didn't necessarily, or hasn't yet, substantially changed what conflict looks like in Russia-Ukraine, in that conflict. There's been a lot of artillery fires, there's been a lot of missiles, there's been a lot of tanks, like all of these things in traditional warfare that people thought were maybe things of the past are still very, very important in today's warfare, at least. And so thinking about how we can use automated or advanced manufacturing to be able to like vastly increase the output of these types of systems to really make a difference in the future fight is definitely something that's on our minds.
I would say, echo the same things that First In is looking at, over at Lavrock as well. One of the things we're looking at these days is kind of the enabling technologies around these future markets, right? So, whether it's manufacturing, adding additive manufacturing to speed up the process, reduce the cost, that's something that we're looking at. A lot of our companies are looking at utilizing, even going as far into the quantum space. I think everyone agrees that quantum technology is going to be, here. The timing is, I guess, less clear, but that will be a future technology. So what is the enabling technologies and infrastructure that we're going to have, in order to support that future state? So looking at that type of technology too is something that we're currently focused on.
Yeah, I think to add, we are maybe a little bit in a different position, our team at Decisive Point, because we will actively pursue investments in defense first and defense only companies to include kinetic systems, military weapon systems. Our companies aren't going to deliver mail with their cruise missiles, so we've been, yeah, maybe they will. No, but we've been, heavily looking into low cost, high volume, attritable mass manufacturing at the edge, moving away from these exquisite systems that when they're done. And that's a very high cost system that we have put forth. So how do we bring down the cost for systems that can go boom and don't need to be recovered, and it's not a massive loss on our end?
It's not like losing a F-35 and
Right,
worrying
exactly.
about it, right?
Yeah, I think that they're all hitting on great themes. Actually, the Foreign Affairs article, I also teach at Columbia as an adjunct. I know the author. And actually, I want to have an argument with him about this, like I kind of did during a separate panel with him. But in any event, yeah, so the issue of bending the cost curve of affordable mass, I think that's super important. The reason why autonomy matters for that is if you're going to try and replace complement, these $150 million manned platforms with unmanned platforms, they need to have a high level of autonomous capability. Otherwise, the adversary's electronic warfare capabilities will shut down your ability to control those systems, and then you'll have lost all these capabilities that you thought you were walking into the fight with. So that autonomy piece ends up being actually critical to our ability to compete effectively with China, not only for kinetic strike, but also to enable effective discrimination on the battlefield between civilians and adversaries, between adversary decoys and high-value targets. But I think more generally, some of what we're seeing in Ukraine that I think is kind of a portable lesson to what we can expect more broadly, and that I expect the department to be trying to adapt to, is actually the issue of adaptation. How do we posture ourselves to rapidly adapt our forces and our capabilities to a rapidly changing threat environment? So the thing about spy versus spy in the cyber world, I think that's going to be true in general in the defense space, and we're already seeing that in Ukraine right now with UAS and electronic warfare capabilities. And so when you start thinking about that as like a broad theme, what are some capabilities, what are some technologies that we can introduce that greatly add to this sort of agility and modularity of our systems? What that could get to issues of if you're building autonomy, can you make it sort of portable across platforms so that you can take systems that were originally designed to be manned or remotely operated, they can become unmanned at the level of design of sort of design? Are there things that you could do in terms of design to make systems more modular and open architecture so that non-traditional, like emerging startups can actually create really cool bolt-on capabilities that they can strap onto the F-35 or other kind of legacy platforms? Are there, on the level of manufacturing, what are some things that we could do to more rapidly, like either at the edge, be able to in theater produce new capabilities and manufacture systems that we need at the front lines, or more rapidly reconfigure what it is that we're designed to manufacture at scale here in the U.S. So, a few broad thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, 2 points to kind of what everyone said. One is, again, we're seeing, I think for the first time in a long time, really positive strides to where we're taking some of the best of Silicon Valley, where we're rapidly innovating, very creative people, and the government for the first time is really, again, opening up to this idea of like, let's let them solve the mission and not specific things. So that's, again, I think that's the biggest maybe like cultural shift, mind shift that I see that's really encouraging is the government being willing to say like, hey, we're typically not great at innovation. We're pretty slow. We're very task oriented. If we can take the best, of the mental of Silicon Valley and open that up, it kind of increases the pace of innovation and solving problems that we didn't even know or quicker and all that stuff. From what we're looking at from Data Tribe, again, we're slightly different. We're tending to pull ex-offensive guys out of the government that have been kind of operating at the nation state level and trying to build commercial technologies. So the things that we've been doing for a few years, I think, are becoming a little bit more prevalent. Critical infrastructure. One of our companies, a company called Dragos, it's the top 3 guys out of the NSA. They were the guys that went into Ukraine when Russia took down the power grid in 2015 and helped with that. Now they've built one of the leading commercial, critical infrastructure companies in the world. We firmly believe that everything is going to become critical infrastructure, from manufacturing to data centers to traditional oil and gas. So we're really kind of focused there. Software supply chain, secure by design. That's something we continue, trying to dive into the world where, product and engineers and sales are infighting because they're worried about pace of deployment and, making a security patch is going to screw with their deployment. That's a tough world to kind of get into, but fundamentally believe that's the future. That's where we have to go. So we spend a lot of time on those kind of like 2 key areas.
Awesome, thanks. And I probably have 1 or 2 more questions here before I open up to the audience. So start kind of preparing your questions here. One thing I want to ask about is, as you're investing across national security, I think a lot of you all have seen both software deals and hardware deals, right? Things that are probably pretty capital intensive. How do you think about investing in founders building hardware solutions at the earliest of stages, right? Sometimes even before a product is really there.
Yeah, I think, so for Decisive Point, our model is really intended to solve a little bit for that. So by coming on as a fractional government team for our portfolio companies and going after various sources of non-dilutive funding, we try to smooth out those early bits of revenue that can be quite choppy for startups. I think out of our first fund, we were able to capture $14 in non-dilutive funding for every $1 we invested. We invest primarily in hardware, so that is really serving to de-risk our investment and accelerate the timelines that might be 20, 25 years down to 10, 15 years, whatever, 10 to 5, whatever it might be for the given technology. And so that's something that's, why we spend a lot of time in due diligence going over, is this technology, is it viable for it to scale in the federal market? Where can we be helpful? And how can we sort of serve to help startups with that at the earliest stages when they need it most?
I mean, at Lavrock, I think traditionally we have been software investors first, and I think, if we invest in hardware business, typically there's a software kind of element to it, right? Because it's been no secret historically that downstream investors will pay higher prices for software multiples are better than hardware multiples, right? I think that is starting to change. We have businesses now that are hardware first in our portfolio. It's obviously more capital intensive to do that. I'm talking with founders later this week about doing equipment financing. Right, it's a totally different approach because now they have to build this stuff. It's the make versus buy decision. It's a lot more complicated of a process from an investor's perspective. But if they do it right and if they truly have a differentiated product, I think there's no reason why it couldn't be just as successful as a business, as a software business that are increasingly becoming more commoditized and in their respective areas.
Yeah, you guys just invested in like hypersonics company, right?
Yes, Lavrock and Firstin are in that together. And what I'll say is like, I think what's really important here, based on what Alex was just saying, is like, you have to, if the product is right, then hardware, and it's the right product and hardware, it can be the right solution. I think one area that is pretty popular right now are drones, right? So we talked about the need for like a bunch of attritable systems, but the drone market right now is super saturated, right? So I think it's like for that particular play, like what is the differentiation there from the hardware aspect? And so kind of looking to pair that hardware and software, as Alex was saying, is really key, and definitely what Firstin is looking at when we think through CapEx intensive businesses.
Yeah, and I don't have anything different to say. We have invested in hardware companies that had software as well. That's basically all hardware companies that are potentially venture backable.
I've done 2 hardware deals in my life. One was trying to build a secure smartphone called the Black Phone. Lost all our money. Don't do that. And the second one was SpaceX, which worked out well. So, in general, we do software. We understand it. That's where our networks are built. Hardware. All these guys talked about all the challenging points. It's really important. I love hardware. I'm a geek. We just don't personally really invest in it.
Awesome. Thanks for all the insights here. Let me turn over here to the audience. I know y'all don't got mics, so just holler it out, and I'll try to repeat it.
So I want to stay on the hardware thing for a second. I'll use drone as an example. Would you be investing in somebody who comes in with a full top-level drone idea, as opposed to somebody who comes in and says, I've got a really good engine, a motor for drones?
Yeah, so kind of question around whether or not folks up here would invest in a platform or maybe more of a component as part of a larger platform. Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, so we've invested in both. I think, again, it comes down to what is the strategy? Do you have an idea of we're going to partner with this research institution, validate with this system, we know this prime wants this capability, and we're sort of aware of all that? Or, component technologies are challenging, especially in DoD. So we have done both. I guess the answer is it depends. It has to be the right deal, which is kind of an unsatisfying answer. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll just say like what would interest me about those two options is like, is your engine like an alternative energy source that increases the dwell time of the drone times 50 or 100? Then we might be talking about something. But yeah, it certainly is a it depends answer. But just something that came to mind.
I've actually been thinking about that a lot over like the last year. It's a thing that I wrestle with a little bit in terms of thinking about like what are the virtues and vices of these things, right? Obviously, like going to market with a full platform, full hardware platform, is going to be more capital intensive, and all the things that we were kind of touching on before. It takes longer to iterate, yada yada yada. But the upside is that you can then have more control over your destiny in terms of really owning the end user and owning your relationship with them and controlling your margins. On the flip side, there's a good case to be made for picks and shovels, and if actually in some ways it gets down to a question of which approach is going to give you more market power, right? So if owning the end user and there's only one end user, like maybe that's less interesting because then they actually still have control of you. But if by focusing on the picks and shovels, like a component, like engines, actually diversifies your customer base, and you have massive economic value that you can create for them, and you can create market pressure. If you can just win one of them, everybody else is forced to follow in order to keep up, then that's obviously interesting.
Are there any conversations or things that hold you back ethically about encouraging investment in weaponizing robots or weaponizing consumer grade technology or things of that nature, considering what our enemies do to execute their attacks?
Yeah, so this is another thing I think about a lot, right? So, like I said before, it's been like close to a decade at a think tank, so these are sort of over coffee conversations we'd have. If you're going to wrestle with those kinds of questions in a very serious way, then you really have to go back to like first principles about things, right? Like, so why in the world do we have a Department of Defense? Why do we have these kinds of capabilities in a truly best of all possible worlds? None of this stuff would exist, full stop, right? So there's this sort of threshold question of like, there's a bunch of things that you need to buy in if you're going to be an investor in this space. From like let me correct that, an ethical investor in this space, right? So, and for myself, and that kind of gets to, the military that we're investing in. Number one, it's controlled by a democracy, right? It's like kind of like a threshold thing. And then like number two, like what's I don't want to end up becoming captured by like the administration to administration foreign policy changes. But at a threshold level, there is continuity at the strategic level in a lot of ways in U.S. foreign policy and national security. A lot of it comes down to, at a basic level, in terms of how it gets instantiated in the Department of Defense, in deterrence, right? Like, we don't actually want to go to war. Like, the core U.S. foreign policy interest in making all these investments is actually, we want a stable and secure, both like in terms of military security and financial, like economic stability, both in Europe and the Pacific, because one from like a moral normative perspective, but also from a market perspective. In order for the U.S. to be prosperous, like the world actually needs to be kind of stable and prosperous. And then like there's a longer conversation to be had there, but then I get really boring really fast. So I'm gonna stop now.
Second part to that question though is where your ethics drop off. Are you worried that there's technology being developed where maybe another customer is the buyer, the other customer is maybe going to get their hands on something that we haven't for sake of ethics?
I mean, touched a little bit on this, right? I mean, deterrent by innovation, right? We need to demonstrate that we're as nimble and ability to innovate, whether it's defensive, whether it's offensive. We need to show that we're a country that's going to invest in that. I don't want to be a policymaker. I want to enable the policymakers to have all the tools in the toolbox to kind of act on the global stage. So not afraid to look at that. Again, from a cybersecurity perspective, like we tend to be more focused on building defensive technologies. Like we're here to protect people. Like most of our founders who are usually ex-government, they want to make sure that they go home and their kids are safe and everyone here in this room's kids are safe. That's the goal. They're not worried about they don't want to go out there and start stuff, but they certainly want to be able to defend themselves. So again, we're trying to innovate, and if we're really good at innovating, we have a really good public-private partnership. I think that'll signal to the world and our adversaries that don't start something because you're probably not going to be able to finish it.
Just real quickly, so it's also not just like whatever we feel like, right? Like there's actually like a regulatory regime that again is governed by people who get elected that decides who like arms, who like lethal things can go to and who they can't go to.
So let me take it to the enterprise. If we look at SolarWinds from a few years back, I work for an enterprise software company. We're Series C now. One of our challenges of getting into government is air gap, SOC, and all those regulations. If you're at C or Series A, how do you get those resources to get through it? Because I know my company, it takes a long time. It's very capital intensive. Like if you guys are actually looking at enterprise software companies, no offense to what's happening over here, but arguably enterprise cybersecurity should be a higher priority. How are you helping those companies? Because without air gap, they will not sell into government. Without those other regulations, they will not sell into government.
All right, so again, not everyone should be pursuing the federal government. Not everyone should be pursuing the Department of Defense. It's like thing one, like going back to a point that a couple people have made, is your product roadmap aligned with a viable go-to-market with that targeted customer, right? But in terms of like more concrete sort of tactical things, right? So thing one, like, are you cloud native or are you on-prem native,
Well,
right?
you
Like,
could both,
but
because you could be
yeah, all right, but you know, a couple other points. There are a couple firms out there that like they're kind of making their business to figure out how to help folks get CMMC, how to folks get authorization to operate, and all these kinds of things, right? And so Second Front Systems, sort of famously been getting off pieces of this. Actually, Palantir just came out with an offering that's getting after a piece of this. I think, frankly, Google is kind of, I think, is headed in developing a product for this. So I think that there's a few mechanisms, but definitely you have to sit down and do some more strategic.
Yeah, I mean, it's still early. It's still hard. It's coming. Whether it's Google, whether it's Amazon, with GovCloud, Snowflake, there's going to be a lot of enablers out there. They're the first guys through the door. It's going to suck. We're going to get there. But again, I think on the commercial side, one thing we really touch on is when you make the decision to go from commercial to Fed Gov, there's a real different type of person that you have to bring in to run those types of businesses. Fed Gov people and dealing with the Fed Gov within an enterprise, whether cybersecurity or whatever, it's a very unique skill set. And so I think this comes down to more people. Sure, you got to have the resources. I think it helps if you have commercial dollars so you can have the runway. The people's really important because you really need someone that's got the experience, is a little bit more of a kind of like, I mean this in lovingly, like a team player. They're a lot more collaborative than maybe traditional sales within enterprise because it's just a different sales motion. So for me, it comes back to the people. If you want to make the move, make sure you've got the bandwidth. I think look for the existing partners that have been the first guy through the door, and then make sure you can hire the right people that have the experience and have the right collaborative nature to build a Fed Gov business within your enterprise sales.
So I've spent most of my career in the defense space, and one of the reasons I left is certain frustration in that industry. But one of the things I started my foundation is consulting. And what I found in the defense space is they seem to be very opposed to consulting to help them, even though they are very bad at certain things, especially related to software. So I'm curious about your opinions on, would you actually fund a consulting firm, or what would be the opening for that in the defense space?
I'm gonna say no. Yeah, on that one. From a venture perspective, doing a venture investment into a consulting firm on that, like that just doesn't really fit our model.
Is that what you meant? Like, would we invest in the consulting, or do you mean would we advise the startup to take advantage of the consulting?
Well, either advise them to accept consultants or fund so that you can get the momentum that you need in order to break into the defense space.
Yeah, so all right, so in terms of investing directly in a consultancy, so a consultancy is a form of services company. So any services company basically scales by like adding additional people into it. And so basically, like in terms of the kinds of margins and like the growth rates you can achieve, it's not venture backable, right? In terms of whether or not we would advise one of our portfolio companies to take advantage of a services company to help them be successful, really depends on the specifics. So we've done that for, say, bid and proposal support. Like if we're not ready, like if in their dual use journey, they're still early enough where we haven't fully validated the defense use case yet, maybe we'll have them use an advisory firm to help them with their bid and proposal. Maybe if we validate that there's like evidence that they're going to hit product market fit, but it's going to take a little bit longer, and gosh, we still need to get CMMC, gotta get this other stuff, then maybe we use those kinds of this sort of compliance-oriented advisory services as they get a little bit more mature. Early on, I'll actually help with their like sort of government relations strategy, but over time, I'm going to hand that off to like full-time people who really know how to do that, and like that's their jam. So that they have the best people, like the best players and the best possible for all their important positions, if that makes sense.
Just one more question for the entrepreneurs. On a coattail of this last question. For the entrepreneurs in the audience, if somebody comes to you with a deal that might look attractive, I'd ask the general question, coming in the door with widget XYZ or whatever, how much do you guys look down the road and say, hey, we can do this, this, and this, and how much do you just say, you guys need to focus in on this and your hands off? I'm very curious about what that experience is for an entrepreneur who's coming in your door and what kind of deals you like to bring in, the kind you really can mold and grow, or the kind that are going to be simple and straightforward.
This is great because this is what I was going to talk about anyway. So great follow-on question. So at First In, one of the big value props that we have for founders is that in addition to having a really experienced full-time team of folks who have operating experience, former founders who have helped scale businesses 0 to 1, we also have an extended operating partner team who consist of some really great experts in their field. So we've got a whole team of sales advisors who have helped early stage companies go and develop their go-to-market strategies from seed, Series A, and beyond. We've got some really great technology and product folks who have done the same. And so from our perspective, especially because we're earlier stage investors at the seed stage, we really want to offer, to the extent that it interests you as a founder, our experience and hard lessons learned to get you to Series A and beyond, because it's in both of our best interests. That's not to say that we don't want, a full product plan and vision from you, and business plan from you, right? Like, we want to believe that you're going to take your company to these crazy levels, and really believe in that mission and vision. But I think, it is, from our perspective, a two-way street in that, we're going to give you money, that's great, but we also want to be in there helping you with the resources that we have on our team.
Yeah, and I can add on top of that too. I think what you said is really important, and obviously, the being flexible enough to kind of change direction and listen to advice is a huge part of being a founder, especially at the early stages. But I would encourage you to come in with the founders to come in with an opinion on it, right, and sell the vision, sell the dream. Because if you can't make the case for why this is going to be a big business or how you're going to get there, even if it's wrong and you have to change your mind or change a different direction, part of your job as a founder is obviously to build something, but you need to be able to sell it to investors, to customers, what have you. So if you don't have a position on that early on, then I think it's hard for us to get on board with it early. So.
Yeah, have you had examples where you've partnered with large system integrators on their corporate initiatives and venture initiatives and teamed up? And do you have examples where that has been successful and maybe on the other end of the spectrum where it's failed miserably?
I hate being the one who's talking the most. This is the problem. Yeah, this is the problem. So and we've co-invested. I know some of the other folks at the stage, actually probably all the folks at the stage have co-invested with defense primes, like these lead systems integrators. In terms, that's played out probably a couple different ways. In some cases, it's like great press release and then no follow-on, right? And so in terms of like while you're going through that negotiating, if like you're going to take capital from, I think this is probably true of any major corporate entity, like while you kind of have their sort of executive level attention, like that's a good moment to set the conditions for success in the post-investment moment, right? In terms of where I've seen collaboration actually be more successful. This was actually not with an artifact of a CVC. This wasn't an artifact of a corporate investment, but the Primordial Labs is the name of the company I have in mind. So they're an autonomy startup building essentially autonomy for machines, right? But right now they're really focused on UAS, and they knew in order to hit programs of record, they needed to partner because they didn't want to start building UAS. They didn't want to start building tanks. They didn't want to start building like all the things that they want to be on. So they very carefully laid out like here are the different programs that we're going to go after that we know that DoD is already planning to fund. These are the major systems integrators for each of those programs. And then they methodically went about developing relationships with each of those. Maybe 2/3 of those relationships didn't work out, but for a third of them, they did. And like right now, they're partnered with Teledyne FLIR, and they're the autonomy solution for the Black Hornet, which is probably going to end up being the program of record for the Army for sort of like squad level small unit UAS solution. So like there's a really interesting path there, and if we can keep reproducing that, proving that out for multiple other programs, and like we end up in a really interesting position. That relationship will have been transformative.
Lee with a final question here.
Fantastic. Very good. Ooh, a lot of pressure. Well, one of the things as a founder, whenever we talk to VCs, they want to know about exit strategy, right? And I'm building something from the ground up. I'm a pre-seed or seed company, and you guys want to know how I'm going to get my money back in 7, 10, 5, 2 years. What strategies should we use from an exit strategy perspective going in and talking to VCs? That would be a great thing to know.
Again, it depends, I think. So our team, we invest primarily in hardware. We're invested in a company called Radiant Nuclear. They're building modular nuclear reactors. That's not a 2-year thing. So I think it depends on the investor and, doing your due diligence as a founder and being even selective with what money you're taking. Like, do you have investors who understand that it's not a 2 to 5 year turn is really important. So important to your journey and what you're building. So again, kind of a non-answer, but I think just, tailoring your approach to who you're talking to and doing your legwork up front.
I mean, at the end of the day, like, it's tough to hear that, but like an investor, the reason they're investing is because they think they can make more money at a future date, right? So there has to be some level of when does this come back, right? And the right investor is not going to balk at the fact that it might take 7 to 10 years for this technology to mature, right? But to know that you have thought about what the potential world looks like at that state. Do you get acquired? Do you IPO? Is there precedence for an IPO in the sector that you're working in, or, are you breaking new ground? Like understanding just how you think about that. Obviously, 10 years from now, it's going to be totally different. No one's going to hold you to that, but understanding how you think, I think that's important. And also, you don't necessarily have to exit for, I guess, I don't want to say a company to get their money back, but or a firm to get their money back, but showing progression. Can you make progress over time? That maybe it's not an exit, maybe you're not generating hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, but are you making technical progress? The fact that you are attractive, people are investing more money, you're just building momentum over that time. So if you can't paint that picture in that next 7 years, then I think it's going to be hard for an investor to see how they get their money back.
Yeah, I'm not going to ask you about the exit at a seed meeting. It's so far away. I'm at that point much more concerned about, are we aligned on how we see the market? Do we understand your product and how you're selling to that market, and that there's real growth, and a belief that that team can execute that? If you can do that, the exit will take care of itself, usually. And again, at seed stage, we're usually making a commitment to you for a decade. So we get it. There's going to be trials and tribulations. Usually worried about going to be worried about making payroll at some point. So again, market analysis, the product, how well are you going to be able to sell in that market? If you could do that, the exit will take care of itself. I'm not overly worried about the exit today.
Awesome. Well, appreciate everyone joining us here today. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to head over to the View House Ballpark, which I think is like a 15-minute walk from here. We'll be, I think, on the top floor for drinks, so I think we're all going to head over there. If anybody wants to join us, feel free. Big round of applause for the panelists. Thanks for coming out tonight.